Hi, it's Danielle Greason from VA Lifestyle Design. Today I'd love to share with you a couple of thoughts that I've been having in my mind over these last couple of days, specifically about freedom and, the way that I've found that to express itself in my life and different scenarios where I've found it to be a challenge or I've found it to come easier. And not only freedom, but the other side of that, the element of responsibility, or the way that I kind of visualize it in my mind is this concept of living above the line. Living above the line. Have you heard about that concept already, whether it's in personal development circles or in coaching scenario, whatever it might be? If you Google now the phrase live life above the line, and then you click on the images for that Google search, you'll see a whole range of variations, visual depictions of this concept of living above the line. But just to simplify it, the real, what it comes down to is if you imagine, a horizontal line on the page, and I'll share one of these actually, I'll pick one out and share it. But you imagine this horizontal line, and above the line is accountability, responsibility, ownership, and below the line is blame, denial, excuses. So I guess that's the basic concept as I learnt it probably about 16 years ago or so. So that's the kind of visual that I have in my mind. But as I said, if you Google that phrase, you'll see a whole range of other kind of variations. But above the line, it's where you're taking that responsibility, you're taking that ownership, you're saying, yes, I'm not waiting for someone else to deliver. I'm not waiting on this to happen. I'm taking responsibility here. And below the line is where we think things outside of us are affecting our emotional state or our experience of life, etc. So whether or not you're familiar with that concept, I hope that gives you a little framework and a kind of idea of what these stories that I want to share first up. So first of all, I want to share with you a kind of time in my life where I had this strong connection that, yeah, I am taking responsibility, I am living above the line. I didn't perceive it in that kind of way, but I still have a strong emotional connection to it. And it was when I was going to university. And there would always be this time, if you've been in a college situation or senior high school or university, whatever it is, where, lecturers or professors are handing back assignments, graded assignments, and everyone's kind of going to the box and going, okay, what was the mark I got? What was the grade I got? Or what have you? And it's this big kind of flurry of activity as everyone kind of sees whether they have passed, whether they've got the grade that they wanted, etc. And in this scenario, for me, when I got out of high school, I couldn't stand high school. I couldn't stand that you had to, have roll call, or even in my senior high school, you had to swipe on and swipe off. I just couldn't stand it. I wanted out, I wanted out, I wanted out. University was different. I felt like I was in my element. No one cared whether you showed up or you didn't show up to a lecture. No one cared whether you handed in your assignment or not. It was all up to you, and I loved that. I thrived on that. It's why I thrive on an online service provider career where we're able to set up those boundaries on our own terms. But I felt comfortable in that space, way more comfortable than I ever had in high school and wanting to escape that scenario. And so when I would see the grades, I would think to myself, oh, okay, that's interesting. Oh, right, the professor has said that I should have done X, Y, or Z. Okay, yep, fair enough. And what I would see happen a lot was that so many students would be bummed out by their grade, and they would immediately be looking at where the points had been deducted on their essay or their assignment or whatever it was, and they would be like, oh, they shouldn't have deducted a point there, or they've done this incorrectly, they've graded this too harshly. And there was very much this sense of living below the line, or acting from a place of being below the line. Blame, denial, excuses. And those conversations happened every time. Have you experienced this? And I would just be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is the case where this person thinks they should have been delivered this grade. Because in my mind, what I realized was, okay, this is a game. It's my choice that I've stepped into this arena of this structure of professional academic learning, and to select classes with these particular lecturers that have these personal, preferences or this style of grading. So how can I play the game better? How can I give that professor what they want and that professor what they want? Because it's a win for me to play the game, right? So in that sense, I found it really like my natural state to live above the line. And it was one of the strongest memories I had of seeing that differentiator there, because it happens so many times. Now, contrast to that, Fast forward a few years later, I'm out in the corporate world for the first time. My first job, I was in absolute internal state of turmoil. If you want to read a little bit more about me sharing the details of that and that emotional state of just disarray that I was in entering the corporate world, I have a blog post called On Finding Your Patch of Paradise on the VA Lifestyle Design blog. So I'll share a link with this post, but you'll be able to get a clearer idea of what I mean by being in turmoil there. And this scenario was that I'd received a scholarship from a government marketing agency to attend university, and as part of that, I was required to actually work for that company for 6 months minimum. But their vision was that I would be coming in and kind of, taking charge and bringing all this new information into that kind of into their processes, etc. And so what happened there was I came into that work environment. They thought that I was this, new go-getter graduate out of uni that was going to come in and make all their lives easier. And that just wasn't the case. I was a kid fresh out of uni with having read a bunch of marketing case studies, and pretty much that was it. With all these seasoned kind of marketing professionals going out, it was tourism marketing, so they're going out to do big promotions for regional tourism in different areas and meeting with the operators on the ground. I won't get into too much detail, but the people that they were thinking that I could come in and step into their roles were very, very experienced, in excess of 15 years experience. And so there was this kind of mismatch in expectations. And there was also me feeling in disarray and not being myself, feeling suppressed, feeling like I didn't want to be there, like I wanted out, like I didn't know how this was going to be feasible for 40 years at that stage. And so what happened there was I started to attach this sense of what's the right way to word it? I started to, my boss, who in that situation, who was a great person, who was a great team leader, was enthusiastic about her work, etc., I started to feel resentment towards her. I started to feel like she was suppressing me, and I started to feel like I couldn't have freedom unless she said so, unless I had a way out. Of course, I told you that I was kind of part of the deal was that I worked there, but I very much started to perceive it. I started to really, really slip below the line in a big way for months. And one of the things that transformed there was that I went to a long 5-day conference on the Gold Coast of Australia it's a Tony Robbins conference called Date with Destiny. And when I was at that conference, there was an exercise, there was a kind of half a day's work on figuring out your hierarchy of values. And every time we were doing any type of work on values and what's important to us in our life and what we're moving towards, I would have freedom at number one. Freedom, 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 freedom. I'd always wanted freedom. It was so attached to it. And it was super funny because I had a big aha moment at that conference because I was just like, it's all about freedom. Life's about freedom. Life's about not being told what to do. It was very kind of rebellious, kind of attached, destructive way that I was in that mindset of chasing freedom. And I didn't realize it. I thought it was a good thing to go after. I thought if I worked enough and I learnt enough about how to, build a career or what have you, that I'd be able to get there that way. And then Tony Robbins came onto stage, very close up to me, big, huge guy, very kind of like, if you've seen him, you would know what I'm saying there. He's got this huge presence, is very influential. And what he said was he asked everyone who has freedom in your top 3. And I'm like, yes, proudly saying me. And then he proceeded to share this story about how he used to have freedom at the top of his values list as well. And then he realized that his attachment to seeking freedom was not allowing him to experience all the choices and the freedom that he already had. He was holding at bay his awareness of the freedom that he already had. So I wanted to make sure I got that crystal clear because, this was such a huge revelation for me. I actually found a little link that I'm going to read it off for you. Okay, so I've just relocated inside because the sun's setting now and it was starting to beat right into my eyes and I couldn't see you. So here's what Tony Robbins had to say. He said, I began to realize that by constantly focusing on how to be free, I was missing out on the freedom I already had. I realized that there was no way I could be any more free than I was in this moment. Maybe my feelings would be different if I lived in a country where the choices I have here don't exist. But for me, there is no way to have any more freedom than I have today. So I decided to drop it from my list and not to make it an issue anymore. It was amazing the freedom I felt by getting freedom off my list, so off his values list. So you can imagine me not reading that, but like sitting right there in front of Tony Robbins saying that after I'd just been sitting there, proudly thinking, yes, freedom is what I'm after, and it was such a huge aha moment. I had this massive realization that the way I was chasing it, the way I was demanding it, the way I was resisting my boss and thinking they weren't letting me have freedom, the way I felt I was obliged by the arrangement I'd put myself into with that internship, with that scholarship arrangement. I realized that none of that was true, and I still had a choice. And the funny thing is I realized it not in a way of like, oh yeah, that's right, not in like an intellectual way. Oh yeah, that's right, I should believe that. I should know that this isn't my boss's problems. I should live above the line. I should take responsibility. But like a really kind of deep emotional level appreciation for that as the actual reality, as the truth, as fact. And that changed a lot of things. It's funny because this was a really strong experience, a strong transformation in my life. And I didn't kind of remember the little details until a couple things. First thing is a good friend of mine, a blogger, a travel blogger here. She was in Bali, actually. She's not anymore. But she had actually recently done a Date with Destiny seminar with Tony Robbins. I believe it was in California. And this was the biggest thing that came, or one of the biggest things that came out of it for her. And I saw her sharing that in social media with similar kind of stories and a similar kind of experience of that huge aha moment. And it kind of brought it back up for me. And also when I went back to Australia, I actually dug up, you might have seen my dream book before, but I also dug up this Date with Destiny workbook. Can you believe I've kept it in such good condition 15 years on? That's amazing. Nerd. So what was I saying? Okay, so there, while I was at Date with Destiny, I'd flown away to a different city in Australia. I had that deep experience there, but even more so, more strongly experiencing the release and the transformation of that was the following week when I'd gone back to Sydney, where I was living in Australia, and I'd been back in the office a couple of days, and I'd caught the bus back home from the city, and I was walking from the bus stop down my street towards my apartment. And all of a sudden, I had this just spontaneous big cry out of nowhere. I thought I was totally fine, still on a high from having been to this amazing kind of transformational event, and just feeling the vibe of that. But then just these tears came over me, and it was like for quite some time. And it was this feeling of like just like deep compassion for myself, for going after freedom in that way, for my boss, for that deep appreciation for her having her own path that she's on, and her own reasons for expecting things the way she did of me. All those types of things. I was just like, hey, we're all just on our own paths here, and sometimes it's not a fit, but that doesn't mean it's the other person's fault. If we're living above the line, we're taking that responsibility, that accountability, that ownership of our decisions, our choices, our actions, acknowledging that it is always a choice, really deeply acknowledging that, then it's okay if we come up and butt against the wrong scenarios where it's not a fit, that was the case big time for me, where I explained to you that I was just in absolute turmoil there at that time of just thinking, I can't work in the corporate world. But it was out of that pure sense of escapism. In a blog post that I mentioned on Finding Your Patch of Paradise, I even talk about that I found a website at that time called escapeartist.com. I don't even know if it exists still, but that'll kind of give you an indication as to the things I was Google searching. So I've shared two stories there. Two stories where I felt that my experience was that it was easy for me to take responsibility and know that I was making a choice to play that game and I was living above the line. In that scenario where I saw other people not doing that in that university situation, and one where I was very clearly not taking responsibility, not thinking I had a choice, etc. And it tends to correlate when we're in those comfortable places, when we're in when we're in our own element, when we're in our place of strength, and where we don't feel like we're suppressing our true selves. It's easy to do. But what I've realized as I kind of move through with business building, with the way I make different decisions, is the more that you're able to make your choices and your decisions from above the line, the more you experience freedom rather than chasing after freedom. That's what I've found. And just from a quote from that blog post that I had written to kind of share with you, and my headspace is around that, I said, you always have a choice. This is what I had a realization of, and which I often need reminders of. Even still, you always have a choice, even when at first it may appear like your hands are tied. And so let's think about what are some specific scenarios where this applies in our careers, collaborating with clients, team members, other contractors, in the virtual world of collaboration. So I want to share with you some of those scenarios where we've always got the choice to go above the line, accountability, responsibility, ownership, or below the line, blame, denial, excuses. So, and we'll look at virtual assistants specifically. So things like rates. Rates is a big one where we've got that two-way decision. Are we going to live above the line or below the line? And, okay, it's my responsibility to set a rate I feel good about. It's my responsibility to be aware that if I'm in a situation where I accept a lower rate role than what is my ideal moving forward, that I take responsibility for how I transition myself out of that scenario later on, rather than feeling resentment, like that resentment I was talking about that I had with my boss, feeling that they were the one holding me in that holding pattern. So it's like, okay, I'm consciously making this decision to work at a lower rate than what my target is, but I know that I can help this client and we can get a win-win in this process, and then this is my plan to transition out. Either I'm doing a temporary project, or I'm doing that at this rate for this period of time, or I'm willing to help the client find another service provider when the time is right. Whatever it might be, that's my responsibility to know why I'm doing this, and the rate that I'm working at should always be the rate that I feel good about. That's my responsibility if I'm living above the line. Things like boundaries. So for service providers, things like lead times and turnaround times. When that email comes in from a client, they're saying, hey, can we start this launch or this campaign or whatever it is tomorrow? It needs to get going because I've just realized X, Y, Z. Okay, whatever the internal reaction is, you don't have to have a perfect internal reaction straight away. You don't have to go, okay, that's no problem. I'm just going to put this client in their place. It's okay to feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. That's fine. It's not about having, this has been my experience of it anyway. It's not that I'm always feeling clear and perfect and the perfect reaction, that I'm always taking responsibility. It's just that that's the underlying belief I have. The underlying framework that's in my mind is, no matter what my daily fluctuations in mood or reaction or what have you, the underlying belief is the more responsibility I take, the more I live above the line, the more freedom I have, right? So turnaround lead times for things coming in, turnaround times, if a client's following you up when you've said it'll be done by X date, okay, am I going to live above the line here? Have I taken responsibility for onboarding them in the right way in the first place? What can I do differently with the next client? How am I able to communicate with this client to resolve that situation of the lack of clarity? Or do I need to take responsibility for moving on and letting this client go? It's a choice. It's always a choice, even when it feels like our hands are tied. They're not, for the most part. Especially like Tony Robbins was saying, in the country we live in, there's so many things that we forget to realize are still choices for us. Another one where there's that potential to slip below the line in certain instances, and I've heard this so many times over the last 6 years, is where there's a frustration or resentment or a feeling of restriction from virtual assistants, where the client has a certain expectation on them to step into a higher level consulting strategic input type role without, in the VA's perception, paying them for that extra level of support. And so I hope that kind of makes sense. So you might have seen this as well. You've seen VA groups, oh my gosh, the client wants me to do X, Y, and Z, and they're only paying me to edit the blog posts. Okay, so again, it's about, living above the line, taking responsibility for setting those boundaries. And like I said, it's not necessarily that, you know, I assume that if you're watching this video, you wouldn't be the type of person that would outright go and overtly complain or write a nasty email back to the client, you know, putting your foot down or what have you. It's way more important is those subtle subconscious thoughts that we need to be aware of, and be aware of where we're subconsciously putting the responsibility on the other person, or we're subconsciously blaming the other person for us being frazzled or flustered or not being in a state of flow with how we're able to schedule our day. So those boundaries with regard to the expectations for, okay, I'm supposed to be a VA and what they actually need is a consultant. Right, what's my choices here? Do I want to step into a consulting role and offer that service at a rate or a package and arrangement that actually brings a win-win from my perspective? Same with project management. If your client is, you know, you think you're doing a task-based role, but your client is trying to get you to coordinate other team members and you're a supporter at the moment, great. That's fantastic. Do you want to step into that role? Do you want to have a conversation with the client about how you can make that work and how you can make yourself available to support those other team members? Huge things where that slight little, you know, resistance in your mind of I shouldn't be doing this or this shouldn't be expected of me. Let that be a trigger for you to ask yourself, how can I take even more responsibility and experience that freedom as a result? Another one for virtual assistants, not giving the client not handing over enough work to make it worth your while. So the client contracted you with a certain expectation of this was the type of working relationship, and the client's going on holidays or you know, still DIYing or what have you. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this one over the last 6 years. So if the client isn't giving you enough work, okay, again, the client's not in business to provide work to VAs. Yes, that would be awesome, and a lot of clients, a lot of team leads operate from that mindset. But when you're thinking about yourself, when you're kind of going, okay, I'm taking responsibility for the growth of my career here and the fulfillment and the way that I'm able to expand, then that is then within the realm of your choice. You kind of go, okay, do I want to set up packages? Do I want to be a one-sourcer? Do I want to work to a preset, predetermined arrangement for the way that the roles that I'm taking on to support this client? Or like I was when I first started, I'm happy to get ad hoc delegated work that I'm just billing by the hour, because I acknowledge that that's the case, and the situation that I'm in, that really works for me. And I'm excited about the client that I'm collaborating with, and this is the scenario they're in, so it's a win for the time being. And if that changes for me, then I'll again take responsibility above the line to change that scenario and let the client know that my needs have changed. Clients not paying their invoices on time. Okay, huge. It's funny, I don't see this one so much in the virtual assistant world, but in the freelancer blogs or like Freelancers Union, things like that, I think it's called Freelancers Union, you know, hearing this real like us against them, oh, the client should pay, or the client's gone off the radar. Okay, what did I do? How did that happen where I, you know, didn't insist on in payment upfront, or I did more work than I was comfortable? I hadn't yet built that level of trust where I worked over the prepaid invoice amount and didn't take responsibility for, you know, making a judgment call on that. So little things like that, even where, yes, it was probably, I don't know what the right word is. What I mean to say there is taking responsibility above and beyond what is reasonable. Like the more responsibility you take, the more that you're able to attract those clients that is the perfect match where you're supposed to be on that path together. Another one is clients going off the radar, or you might hear this referred to as like clients ghosting or what have you. They go on holidays, they work on different projects or what have you. Okay, that's great. Living above the line. I won't get into too much detail. I want to just kind of share the scenarios so you can be kind of reflecting on those instances in your own VA business. Not for where you've overtly complained, but as I said, where are those subconscious reactions where you're looking out and saying they shouldn't be doing this? I'm struggling, or I'm experiencing frustration, or I'm experiencing a lack of freedom because of that. And then figuring out what the next move is from there. Another one that I see is responding where someone has expressed frustration that a client hasn't responded to all applications after publicly submitting a role, or publicly sharing a role that's open for people to submit applications. And then, sure, it would be really cool if that person took the time to go through and thank, 100 applicants one by one. But sometimes that's just not feasible. Again, we're in this scenario where we're not dealing with the corporate world where there's this procedure and HR has to formally thank everyone who's submitted their resume. We're dealing with small to medium entrepreneurs, in large part. Yes, some VAs are working with large or departments of large corporations, but everyone has their own responsibilities and their own things that they need to prioritize. And so we just go, okay, we didn't hear back. All right, am I going to follow up through this other communication mechanism, a different way to make sure it got through? And from there, I keep moving forward. My eyes are moving forward. My eyes are not looking back behind me going, when is that person going to respond? When is that person going to say yes? When is that person going to give me more work? When is that person going to say I can have a rate increase? My eyes are looking forward. That's the way I'm going. And the right clients are attracted to that energy of you being on your path, right? So that's where this comes into play. So responding, yeah, right. So if you don't hear back and you follow up, okay, great, keep going. Providing feedback. Okay, so there's this other scenario where we've kind of been trained into it from the corporate world of when we do something, when we complete a project or we do a task or we figure something out or we help someone, that a boss or a supervisor or a colleague is going to go, oh wow, that's amazing, thank you so much, toast at the Friday drinks to this person finishing this project, etc. And we're trained and conditioned into it from school, from the corporate world, from hospitality, retail, wherever you've worked offline, to wanting that external approval, feedback, praise. And it doesn't always come free and fast when you start out working in the virtual world, before you've built up those relationships and that presence, or even then, because then it's just everyone, yep, got that done, great, you're doing that, I'm doing that, perfect. And I find that sometimes this can be one where it's a very subtle way of living below the line, but you're not taking responsibility for patting yourself on the back. You're not taking responsibility for going, okay, I'm a little bit uncertain, I don't quite know if I did it right, but I did that research and I asked this question, I'm quite sure that's fine, they'll tell me if not, and just leave it at that. Keep moving forward, the next project, the next task, the next correspondence, the next collaboration. And the praise will come here and there where that person feels the inspiration to, not just out of a matter of procedure, because as I said again, where, it's this amazing freedom where we're stepping up as, mutual business owners, equals, collaborators, entrepreneurs, that we've got multiple projects on the go. And so when the time is right for those genuine connections, that genuine ability for people to express their praise, the next time they hop on a call, what have you, that comes. Now, that's not the case across the board. Some clients, every time you send something through the project management space, they're over the moon, and they write and they tell you so, and they tell you every time you hop on a call. But I feel that having awareness of if that makes you a little bit uncomfortable when that doesn't come through, just kind of go, okay, I feel that that's uncomfortable inside. It's not that I'm like devastated. It's not that I'm, just like hanging on it. But I know there's this little sense of expectation and discomfort in me. So how could I let that go? How could I take even more responsibility of knowing this person's just doing their thing? Provided that we're still doing our arrangement as we agreed, then I know that they're happy with the work, and that's that. Okay, I'll stop going into detail there. I hope those little scenarios gave you some food for thought. And now, I guess just to finish up, looking at, all right, let's have some self-reflection time. Where am I living above the line? Where am I living below the line? What's triggering me? Where am I uncomfortable? Where that's my natural response? What could I do about that? What could I change there? And then, with freedom, tying this back around to the stories I was sharing, because this is all these things, choosing to live above the line in all these different scenarios and so many others, that's where I feel that I've been able to access that freedom, not from having freedom as the thing I'm chasing at the top of my values list. And whenever I'm feeling stuck, I know that it's because I'm not taking responsibility. And I'm by all means not perfect at these things. The position that I'm sharing it from is more of a sense of that's the underlying belief, the underlying framework, and being consistently inconsistent with that throughout your life still brings results, even without perfection. Yeah, so where am I chasing freedom? Or where am I demanding or expecting freedom to be handed to me? And where am I just appreciating the freedom I already have? And where am I kind of allowing that freedom to just seep into my life as the default, as the natural, next step from taking more responsibility? I really hope that helps, guys. I know it's a lot of detail there, brain dump for you, but also I'll share that link to the blog post I was talking about. It's called On Finding Your Patch of Paradise. So you can get a bit of an idea of where this all started, before I started working online. All right, talk soon. Ciao.